Yesterday, not last week, not last month, yesterday, the Atlantic Council published an article about Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso. The title was, "The Sahel's Most Acute Crisis is Unfolding in Burkina Faso." They called it a collapsing state. They said Traoré controls the narrative through repression and propaganda. They said everything you have seen about this man online is an illusion designed to hide a country that is falling apart. I read every single word, 1,400 words, and what I found was not a lie. But it was not the truth either. It was something more dangerous. It was half the truth, the half that serves a very specific interest. And in this video, I am going to show you the other half, the half they left out. And I am going to let you decide which story is real. If you believe Africa deserves more than half a story, subscribe to this channel, because that is exactly what we do here. Now let me show you what the Atlantic Council published, what they got right, and what they deliberately chose not to tell you. Their first claim is the biggest one. They say security in Burkina Faso has gotten significantly worse since Traoré took power in September 2022. They cite a statistic. Extremists have killed an estimated 87% more civilians than in the preceding 3 years. They also say government-aligned forces have killed up to 132% more civilians than in the 3 years before Traoré. I am going to be honest with you. These numbers are based on data from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, commonly known as ACLED. And the data is real. Violence in Burkina Faso has been devastating. In 2024, ACLED recorded 7,522 conflict-related fatalities. Since 2016, when the insurgency first entered from Mali, over 26,000 people have been killed. Roughly 15,500 of those deaths have occurred since the September 2022 coup. And then there is Barcelona. On August 24, 2024, JNIM fighters, the Al-Qaeda affiliate Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, attacked civilians who had been ordered by the military to dig defensive trenches around the town of Barcelona in the Center-Nord region. The civilians were unarmed. They had shovels and pickaxes. The fighters arrived on motorcycles and opened fire. The massacre lasted from 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. Human Rights Watch confirmed at least 133 dead through video analysis. CNN, citing a French government security assessment, estimated the death toll at over 600. The Collective Justice pour Barcelona, a survivors group, put the number at over 400. JNIM claimed 300. Whatever the exact figure, it was the deadliest single attack in Burkinabe history and the deadliest attack in the entire jihadist insurgency. I will not hide this from you. This happened. It happened under Traoré's watch, and it exposed a catastrophic failure to protect civilians who were following orders from the very military that was supposed to keep them safe. Human Rights Watch has also documented other atrocities, including a February 2024 massacre by military forces and government militia in the villages of Soro and Nandon, where 223 civilians were killed. As of the end of 2025, there has been no progress in investigating these killings. So yes, the Atlantic Council is not making this up. The violence is real, the suffering is real, but here is where the article stops telling you the full story. They did not tell you that Burkina Faso was already the most terrorism-affected country on the planet before Traoré took power. The Global Terrorism Index published by the Institute for Economics and Peace ranked Burkina Faso number 1 in both 2023 and 2024. But the escalation started long before. In 2011, Burkina Faso was ranked 114th. By 2017, it was in the top 30. By 2020, it was number 6. Every single year, the situation got worse. Under democratic governments, under Western-aligned leadership. They did not tell you about Operation Barkhane. From August 2014 to November 2022, France ran the largest overseas military operation since the Algerian War across 5 Sahel nations, including Burkina Faso. At its peak, 5,100 French soldiers were deployed. The operation cost France between 650 million and 1 billion euros every single year. And what happened during those 8 years? Fatalities from militant Islamist violence in the Sahel increased every single year from 2017 to 2022. The geographical spread of attacks proliferated. Before France intervened, jihadist groups were limited to northern Mali. By the time Barkhane ended, they had spread across central Mali, southwestern Niger, and most of northern and eastern Burkina Faso. The Center for Strategic and International Studies noted that France's approach was overwhelmingly militarized and based on the incorrect assumption that terrorist groups are the root of instability in the Sahel. Cambridge University published a paper in 2025 calling it a failure that France refused to even investigate. The French Parliament never demanded an inquiry. 8 years, up to €1 billion a year. And terrorism got worse every single year. The Atlantic Council did not mention any of this. They did not tell you that in 2024, according to the Global Terrorism Index 2025, terrorism deaths in Burkina Faso actually dropped by 21% compared to 2023, falling from 1,935 to 1,532. Attacks dropped by 57%, from 260 to 111. This is still catastrophic, but it is a measurable improvement. And it is the first meaningful decline after years of continuous escalation. And they absolutely did not tell you that by the end of 2024, over 1 million internally displaced people had returned to their homes. The UNHCR confirmed it. The European Commission's Humanitarian Aid Division confirmed it. 640,000 people returned in 2024 alone. When Traoré took power, 2.06 million Burkinabe were displaced. That number is now declining, not because people are dying in larger numbers, but because towns are being recaptured and communities are being resettled. Operation La Mosca, launched in late 2024, recaptured dozens of towns from insurgent groups, particularly in the Nakambe region, near Kampienga Dam, in Namsagia around Djibo and Tulfe. Thousands of displaced families received support to restart agricultural activities in newly secured areas. People do not return home when things are getting worse. The second major claim in the article is that Traoré has silenced all opposition and turned Burkina Faso into a closed information environment. They describe forced conscription of journalists, banning of political parties, and suspension of international media. Let me walk through this carefully because it matters. In June 2024, 3 prominent media figures were abducted in Ouagadougou. Serge Oulan, director of the investigative newspaper L'Événement, and 2 television commentators, Khalifara Serré and Adama Bayala, known for their criticism of the government. In October 2024, a Justice Ministry official confirmed they had been forcibly conscripted into the military. Serré was released in July 2025. Bayala was released in September 2025. As of the latest reports, Oulan remains missing. In March 2025, 3 more journalists were arrested, including Guzuma Sanogo and Bukari Awoba, the president and vice president of Burkina Faso's own journalists association, along with BS1 television journalist Luc Pagbelgum. A video circulated days later appearing to show the 3 in military uniforms. Reporters Without Borders condemned it as a staged performance designed to intimidate the entire profession. They were released in July 2025. Reporters Without Borders reports that at least 6 journalists have been forcibly conscripted between June 2024 and September 2025. A dozen Burkinabe journalists have been forced into exile since Traoré came to power. At least 10 foreign media outlets have been suspended or blocked, including Jeune Afrique, Deutsche Welle, The Guardian, BBC, and Voice of America. In January 2026, Traoré's government ordered the dissolution of all political parties, arguing they had promoted division. I am not going to sugarcoat any of this. Forcing journalists into military service is wrong. It is a violation of press freedom. It creates an environment of fear and self-censorship. When the president of a country's journalists' association is arrested for holding a press conference about restrictions on free expression, that tells you something about the state of media freedom. Human Rights Watch called it desperation to control the truth. I understand why they said that. But here is the context the Atlantic Council chose to leave out entirely. They did not tell you that Burkina Faso is fighting a war, not a metaphorical war, not a policy disagreement, an active armed conflict against two of the four deadliest terrorist organizations on the planet, JNIM and Islamic State Sahel Province. This is a country where 5,000 schools have been closed because of violence, where over 800,000 children cannot attend class, where 424 health facilities have been shut down, where armed groups have besieged entire towns, cutting off food and humanitarian aid for months. They did not tell you that the suspended media outlets were, in several documented cases, broadcasting content that the government classified as compromising active military operations. When BBC and Voice of America were suspended in April 2024, it followed their reporting on human rights abuses, but it also followed a pattern where specific reports were used by insurgent groups for tactical intelligence. I am not saying that justifies censorship. I am saying the article presented it as pure authoritarianism without acknowledging that there is a war happening. They did not tell you that France itself was caught funding media campaigns against Sahel governments during the same period. Anti-French sentiment did not appear from nowhere. It was fueled by decades of perceived neo-colonial exploitation, by the visible failure of French military operations, and by specific incidents like the 2021 French airstrike that hit a wedding in central Mali and killed 19 civilians, or the November 2021 incident in Terra, Niger, where French soldiers fired on protesters blocking a military convoy, killing 3. And they did not tell you about the political parties they are mourning. These are the same parties that governed Burkina Faso for 6 decades. The same parties under which 64.5% of the population remained multidimensionally poor. The same system through which Blaise Compaoré, the man who assassinated Thomas Sankara with over 20 bullets and ruled for 27 years, maintained power. When those parties were dissolved, Western media called it authoritarianism. Burkinabe citizens flooded social media with celebrations. The Atlantic Council quoted neither. Does press freedom matter? Absolutely. Is forcing journalists into the military defensible? No. But if you write 1,400 words about Burkina Faso's information environment and do not mention that there is a war, that France's own information operations failed catastrophically, and that the political system being dismantled was itself built on decades of corruption and foreign dependence, then you are not providing analysis. You are providing a frame. The third claim is about propaganda and online disinformation. The article says AI-generated music videos show celebrities like Beyoncé, Justin Bieber, and R. Kelly praising Traoré. It says videos claim Burkina Faso now produces its own smartphones and vehicles, claims that are unsupported by evidence. It says online discourse glorifies Traoré while diverting attention from escalating violence. This is true. The deepfake problem is real and it is serious. BBC monitoring identified a deepfake video in March 2024. Falsely depicting Nigerian musician Burna Boy endorsing Traoré, which got over 1 million views on TikTok. Meta's quarterly threat reports have flagged thousands of AI-generated posts from Burkina Faso-linked accounts pushing fictitious policies. Fake housing videos from China and Algeria have been passed off as Traoré's construction projects. Africa Check, Pesa Check, and Fact Check Ghana have all debunked multiple viral claims. I have called this out on this channel before, and I will call it out again. These fakes hurt Traoré's credibility more than they help. They give outlets like the Atlantic Council exactly the ammunition they need to dismiss everything as propaganda. But here is what the Atlantic Council did with this problem. They used the existence of fake content to avoid mentioning any real content. In 1,400 words, they cited 0 development projects. Not one. Let me list what they chose not to write about. In July 2024, the government launched the construction of 1,000 social housing units for internally displaced families, distributed across the Center North, Uwahiguya, Nabreongo, and Bobo Dioulasso, funded not by taxes or IMF loans, but by redirecting government waste. The housing minister directed all departments to review spending and cut unnecessary expenditures. A larger program called Burkina Faso Dinwu Kasu, meaning roughly a home for every Burkinabe, targets the construction of 50,000 housing units by 2028. By October 2025, more than 1,500 had been completed. For context, the previous governments built approximately 5,000 state housing units in the entire decade from 2007 to 2017. Traoré's plan aims to build 10 times that in 4 years. In October 2024, the foundation was laid for the Burkindi Business Center in the Ouaga 2000 district, a $528 million public-private partnership that includes a 35-story tower, 14 15-story buildings, a 3-story shopping center, 2,000 offices, 700 apartments, a health center, nurseries, sports facilities, and 3,000 parking spaces. The French-language magazine Jeune Afrique called it Ouagadougou's Manhattan. In November 2023, the government approved the construction of Burkina Faso's first gold refinery. By 2024, the state-owned company Sopamib had seized control of 2 operational gold mines from London-listed Endeavour Mining. By June 2025, 5 additional mining assets were transferred to Sopamib. State-controlled entities collected over 8 tons of gold in 2024. In just the first quarter of 2025, they collected 11 tons. Burkina Faso's gold production reached 94 tons in 2024, generating 776 billion CFA francs in revenue. In December 2024, a tomato processing plant was inaugurated in Pognongo with capacity to process 5 tons per hour. A second cotton processing plant was built. The first National Support Center for Artisanal Cotton Processing opened. 400 tractors were distributed free to farmers. Agricultural production surged. Tomatoes from 315,000 to 360,000 metric tons. Millet from 907,000 to 1.1 million tons. Rice from 280,000 to 326,000 tons. In his December 31, 2025 address, Traoré declared that Burkina Faso had achieved food self-sufficiency for the first time. Air Burkina was revived with a brand new Embraer E190 jet, now flying to 6 West African countries. The Ouagadougou-Donson Airport is under construction with capacity for 1 million passengers annually. 15 mobile clinics were deployed to rural areas. A Treasury Deposit Bank was opened in August 2024, allowing citizens to invest directly in their country, while the state borrows from its own people instead of the IMF. And on February 12, 2026, just 11 days before this Atlantic Council article was published, Traoré's government passed a decree requiring every company operating in Burkina Faso with annual revenues above 5 billion CFA francs to physically build its headquarters inside the country. Companies earning over 100 billion CFA francs must construct buildings of at least 7 stories. The message: if you make your money here, you build here. None of this is a deepfake. None of this is AI generated. Every single item I just listed is verified by official sources, international organizations, or credible investigative journalism. The Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa documented the housing programs. Africa News reported the Food Self-Sufficiency Declaration. Channels Television and Heritage Times covered the company headquarters decree. The Agence d'Information du Burkina covered the Burkindi Business Center. Multiple international outlets covered the gold nationalization. The Atlantic Council mentioned none of it. 0 projects, 0 development, 0 economic reform in an article about the state of Burkina Faso. Ask yourself why a think tank funded by defense contractors and foreign governments would write 1,400 words about a country and mention only what is failing, while ignoring everything that is being built. The article also states that extremists now operate with relative freedom across as much as 80% of the country, though it notes that Ouagadougou contests this figure. This is a serious claim, and it deserves serious analysis. But the word operate is doing a lot of work in that sentence. JNIM and Islamic State affiliates do launch attacks across large parts of Burkina Faso's territory, particularly in rural areas in the north, east, and increasingly the west. The Center-Nord region has been devastated. The tri-border area with Mali and Niger remains extremely dangerous. But operating in an area and controlling it are fundamentally different things. Guerrilla groups, by definition, operate across territory they do not control. That is what makes them guerrillas and not governments. Operation Lal Mosca recaptured towns, displaced populations returned, new infrastructure was built in recaptured areas. These are not the actions of a state that has lost 80% of its territory. For comparison, the United States spent 20 years in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban, which at various points operated across over 70% of Afghan territory. With the largest military budget on Earth, with drones, satellites, special forces, and a global intelligence apparatus. Nobody at the Atlantic Council wrote an article saying America had constructed illusions of strength in Afghanistan. Nobody called the Pentagon's communications about progress an online discourse designed to divert attention from escalating violence, even though that is exactly what it was for 2 decades. The standard applied to African countries is consistently different from the standard applied to anyone else. Now let me address the part of the article that reveals its real purpose. The last paragraph contains this sentence: should this trend continue, the United States and its regional partners may ultimately lose the ability to anticipate threats, direct resources, and respond to a crisis that is already spilling across international borders. Read that sentence one more time. Direct resources. This is not concern for Burkina Faso. This is concern for American strategic access. The Atlantic Council is not a humanitarian organization. It is a geopolitical think tank based in Washington, D.C. Its board includes former secretaries of state, defense, and directors of the CIA. Its donors include the governments of the United Arab Emirates, Japan, and multiple NATO nations, as well as defense companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman. When the Atlantic Council writes about Africa, it writes about access. When it warns about losing the ability to direct resources, it means losing influence over a region that contains some of the world's richest deposits of gold, uranium, manganese, and rare earth minerals. Burkina Faso alone is Africa's 4th largest gold producer. The Sahel sits on resources that matter to the global economy. For 60 years, from 1960 to 2022, Burkina Faso had Western-aligned governments. French military bases operated on its soil. IMF structural adjustment programs shaped its economic policy. World Bank loans defined its development trajectory. USAID programs dotted its landscape. European Union development aid flowed in continuously. And in those 60 years, Burkina Faso remained one of the 5 poorest countries on Earth. Every single year, the Human Development Index ranked it 185th out of 193 countries. 64.5% of the population was multidimensionally poor. 2 million people were internally displaced before Traoré took power. 5,000 schools were already closed. The Atlantic Council was not publishing urgent analyses about that crisis. There were no think tank papers about how 60 years of Western engagement produced one of the poorest nations on the planet. Nobody called François Hollande's Sahel policy an illusion of strength. Nobody described the IMF's structural adjustment as a narrative designed to divert attention from deteriorating conditions. But the moment a 34-year-old African army captain says, "We are doing this ourselves. We are nationalizing our gold. We are building our own factories. We are feeding our own people. We are borrowing from our own citizens instead of your banks," suddenly it is a crisis that requires American attention. That is not analysis. That is anxiety. The anxiety of a system that is watching its access disappear. Let me close with honesty, because this channel runs on honesty and nothing else. Ibrahim Traoré is not a perfect leader. I have never said he is, and I never will. The crackdown on press freedom is real, and it is wrong. Journalists should not be kidnapped off the streets of Ouagadougou and forced into military uniforms. The Barcelona massacre revealed a devastating failure to protect civilians. The investigation into the Soro and Nondon killings by government forces has gone nowhere. 5.9 million people still need humanitarian assistance. The insurgency is not over. The country remains one of the poorest on Earth. These are facts. I accept all of them. This is a man who refused the presidential salary and continues to collect a captain's pay, who declared a personal net worth of $128,000, who nationalized gold mines that foreign companies had been draining for decades and turned the revenue into hospitals, roads, housing, and factories, who distributed 400 tractors to farmers and achieved food self-sufficiency in a country that used to depend on imports, who revised a dead airline, launched a $528 million urban development project, opened a treasury bank for citizens, built mobile clinics for villages that had never seen a doctor, and sent 1 million displaced people home, who did all of this while fighting 2 of the deadliest terrorist organizations on the planet, without borrowing a single dollar from the institutions that kept his country in debt for 60 years. The Atlantic Council wants you to see a dictator running a propaganda machine, and parts of what they describe are real, but they do not want you to ask the harder question. What happened during the 60 years before him? Who was in charge? What was built? And why did the same organizations that are now sounding the alarm stay silent, while an entire nation was strip-mined of its resources, its dignity, and its future? The article is titled, "The Sahel's Most Acute Crisis is Unfolding in Burkina Faso." I would argue the Sahel's most acute crisis has been unfolding for 60 years. And for the first time in those 60 years, somebody is actually trying to end it. Whether he succeeds is a question history will answer. But the fact that the Atlantic Council felt the need to publish this article yesterday tells you something. It tells you that what Traoré is building was not in their plan. I want to hear from you. Did the Atlantic Council get it right? Or did they tell you half the story? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this video showed you something you will not find in any Western think tank report, share it with one person. Just one. That is how the narrative changes. I will see you in the next one.